You know how they say don't judge a book by its cover? They are right, because the cover might be very pretty and the book itself might be.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
Your mom, your brother, your sister, your grade school teacher, and everyone in this world would be able to come up with the exact same plot. So today I will delve into some books that I saw everywhere. I saw all over my TikTok feed, I saw all over Goodreads, and I thought to myself that these books would change my life. And when I read them, I was still unemployed and on the brink of deportation. So in this list, I will start out with the books that aren't necessarily so bad that you can't get through them, but they massively failed to live up to the insane hype that they had. Two books that caused me to have a full-on aneurysm thinking about how people can enjoy absolute garbage wrapped in a book cover. But let's get started, shall we? So the first book in the list is These Violent Delights. I remember very clearly when this book came out. I believe it was 2020, 2021, at the peak of COVID. At the time, I was following the author Chloe Gong from TikTok, and I was intrigued, mesmerized, blown away by the premise of this book as advertised to me on her TikTok. A historical fantasy of a Romeo and Juliet retelling that takes place in 1920s Shanghai. It sounded so unique and such a clever way of taking this old as bone story and revitalizing it in a new, exciting way. I was immediately like, gimme, gimme, gimme. The thing is, okay, like it wasn't that bad, but compared to the insanely ambitious premise, it was so disappointingly dull. Most of the time, not much happened in the book. Like a book about Romeo and Juliet with rival Shanghai gangs, where Shanghai's ports are invaded by a bunch of colonists, and not much happened. This book is written in third person limited, so we have a bunch of different POVs, including Juliet, Roma, which is the Romeo character, but also a bunch of other side characters who are Juliet's cousins and some of Romeo's friends or family members. I don't really remember even their names because they were just so forgettable and so unnecessary. I don't know why they needed a point of view. All I remember was that there was this creature killing up people in the city, broken up by some pages of Juliet being hashtag badass, and by being hashtag badass, that means she was threatening her housekeeper or just people working in her household who work on less than minimum wage, and she was treating them so poorly. I mean, nothing screams badass as abusing your housekeeper as a rich, entitled child who's studied abroad and came back to her hometown and pretending like now you're the boss of everything. I remember nothing about the guy that is in any way memorable. And according to the description of the author, meaning the description of Juliet, Roma might be white. He might be a colonizer, but he is one of the good colonizers. I don't want to be that guy, but I see this with my Asian friends as well. What is y'all's obsession with mid-looking white men? All my Asian friends, funny, smart, ethereally beautiful, and they will go to date guys that look like this. The most painfully mid-average Joes that look like they yell at their mom to cut the crust off of their sandwich. Please, if anyone knows Chloe Gong out there, you need to tell me. You need to tell me that she's not dating some mid-white dude. And the whole thing ends in such a lame cliffhanger. I'm sorry, but no matter how many TikToks you make about how brilliant your book is, if the actual writing is lacking, I'm not gonna read the sequel. I'm sorry. Again, great premise, poor execution. But to be fair, what were we all expecting? The author of this novel is very young, just like a year older than me, in fact. I think she's a 1999 baby. And I am not saying young authors can't be successful. Clearly, this author has garnered a lot of success from this series and launched an entire writing career. But I think, especially with a craft such as writing, it takes a lot of time to get better at it. I'm not saying this is bad as a debut book. I'm not saying it's a bad book either, but there was no way it was gonna live up to those lofty ambitions. The author also on her TikTok just like promise so many things. I'm like, bro, can this book vacuum my house and brush my teeth too? to? Like, what else can it do? So instead of promising me all these lofty goals, maybe just focus on your craft, take your time to actually improve upon the craft of writing. The narrative, character development, and the dialogue is severely overshadowed by this flowery language and these themes that feel like they're shoved into your face to make sure that you'll understand this book is super deep. And I'm not saying authors shouldn't go off platforms like TikTok and Instagram to market their books. That's an amazing way to garner new readers, but I feel like when you just put a bunch of tropes and a bunch of themes, the expectations you will get for your book will vary immensely. The second book on our list is Amber in the Ashes, or The Ember in the Ashes. Don't quote me on that. Now, I know I will get some pushback on this one because this is a very, very popular and beloved series, but I'd like to share my 2 cents on it since I actually went ahead, trudged through the mud, and finished this series as well. To be fair, I actually really enjoy the world building and the exploration of Middle Eastern / Islamic mythologies sprinkled with power structures that resemble ancient Rome. I think this was a very interesting mix. I really had fun reading about the world the author had constructed. I liked the military ranking system that they had and the masks these people wore, how these masks took the shape of their face. And I thought the premise was pretty compelling too. An oppressive empire kidnaps the brother of the main character, so the main character has to go into this very dangerous military camp to leak information to a group of rebels in the hopes of finding her brother. But again, the execution. I am not one of those conceited people that claim that YA is always juvenile and trash and not worth reading. No, I absolutely love reading a good YA if it's well written. But the thing about this book is it takes every trope that is cliche and done to the point of death in the genre and just does it and doesn't add anything onto it. Reading some of the lines of this book just makes my cringe rater absolutely explode. Like, slave girl rebels against big empire. She's so pretty, but she doesn't know she's so pretty. There is a point of view from the main guy's perspective, Elias's perspective, and there is a line saying that Laia, the main character, not knowing that she's pretty makes her even more pretty. There are so many unsubtle and heavy-handed attempts at feminism and hashtag girl power that I'm like, you might as well jam out my eyes with what you're trying to say. And all these attempts at feminism are kind of overshadowed by the fact that the one military academy in this universe has only one female student, and she constantly gets sexualized even by her best friend. The commander of the military academy, which is Elias's mother, is always cruel, especially to Elias, to her son, because apparently her father didn't choose her as the successor of the Grand Viturious family because she has that gene, even though she's the best at literally everything she does. The blatant sexism of Karis's father is just the cherry on top of everything. There are just too many pages, especially in the first book, about Elias considering whether he should or should not Helene, even though he obviously cares about her and finds her attractive. But he can't because Laia's supposed to be more attractive and she's supposed to be the one that Elias falls for because only the author gets to decide who gets the bone who in this book. I did read the rest of the series in case it got better, but I can tell you guys, if you had an inkling of an interest of the main duo, the main romantic relationship between Laia and Elias, don't bother reading because even though technically at the spoiler and they get together, the romance kind of just like fizzles out in the midway books because the guy is not even with the girl half the time. He goes on this like very absurd side quest of becoming like a ghost / genie that herds people to the afterlife. So most of the time he is with this like genie teacher learning how to do genie stuff. So he's not physically or mentally there with the girl. Even with an interesting twist at the end of the second book, the story just devolved into something I didn't really care about. Yeah, it is revealed that this guy from the rebellion turned out to be the big bad genie that they have to deal with, and he lied to Laia about being someone else. And then what? So much stuff happens, but none of it carry impact or emotional importance. There were big wars, big betrayals, big reveals, and I'm just like, okay. The lesson learned here is that Goodreads reviews can be misleading, guys. Don't trust them. If you don't take my word for it, I've been trying to sell the first 2 books, which I have physical copies of in Facebook Marketplace. They've been there in my Facebook marketplace for months and no one has been buying them. Please guys, if you really after this still want to read these books, please take these books off of my hands. I want them gone. They're just collecting dust in my cupboard. All right, so the next book that we're going to be talking about is The Inheritance Games. So unlike An Ember in the Ashes, I haven't read the entire series. I've only read the first book, but I have a lot to say about even this one book. So recently I saw an Instagram reel of a girl getting like super hyped up mentioning this author, the same author, Jennifer Lynn Barnes. She was reading another book from a different series that this author wrote, saying that this book was really doing it for her. This series was so intriguing because this author really understood how human psychology worked, because apparently the author had a psychology PhD from Yale. And not gonna lie, that got me curious. I'm like, a psychology PhD from Yale? Imagine the characters this person would write. Imagine the kind of depth. Can someone please teach me how to pronounce this word, because I can't. Depth. Imagine the kind of depth they will have. Imagine the kind of depth they would have. The sort of balls deep approach to a character psychology that a Yale PhD would have. I went ahead and searched this woman out, which was my first mistake, because oh my god, is she an accomplished woman. Not only did she graduate from Yale with her undergrad degree, she also got her PhD from Yale and then went on to conduct autism research in the University of Cambridge. And on top of that, she's a New York Times bestselling author and she's happily married with 3 kids. Just looking at this woman's life makes me feel like such a loser who's done nothing with their life. Do not mention this woman to my mom. Thank God we're from different generations. And imagine having Jennifer Lynn Barnes in your high school class. And throughout all her work, I heard Inheritance Games the most. I think it's one of her more popular series. The premise sounds very, very interesting. It's about how this one strange young girl inherits all the money from a dead billionaire, even though she has no connection to the billionaire as far as she knows, which sets up a super interesting mystery. Why did this very rich old guy leave all his money to him and not his own children and grandkids? How does it all connect? We are promised puzzles, mysteries, family intrigue, but the actual book is much more diluted version to what we're promised. Again, it's not necessarily bad. Let me put it this way. If Unseasoned Chicken and Vegetables was a book, this would be it. Nothing special, nothing outstanding, not bad, but definitely not flavorful. And after eating it, you're like, okay, that was a meal, but perhaps something else next time. Something marinated, something that has a little bit spice, my white friends. And someone who has a PhD in psychology or cognitive science from Yale. Why does her characters all sound like video game NPCs?
Yes. Piss off. Fare thee unwell.
All of them just have one defining characteristic about them, which is usually not even internal. It is some sort of external feature that defines them, that is repeated over and over and over and over again for us to, I guess, remember who this character is. We don't really see what is even happening inside the character. We don't know who these characters are, basically. All of this adds up to one of the most bland casts in a book that I've ever read. I do not like or hate the main character. She's mid. Like everything in the book, she's a big meh. All the 4 grandkids all kind of talk and act in such a similar way that you can't really distinguish in between them. There is no individuality to any of them, as they're only distinguished by surface level traits, such as Grayson's gray eyes. Get it? Xander's 6'3" height, which is repeated like at least 3 times within the book for some reason, very relevant and important to the plot that I'm hoping will come up in the rest of the series. Jameson's green eyes, and the fact that Nash is trying to sleep with the main character's sister, because other than that, I don't know anything about these characters. Most importantly, I wasn't given anything to feel for these brothers. They're these super rich socialites that were cut off from their super mega rich billionaire grandfather's will, so we should feel sorry for them. Womp womp. There is not only the mystery of how this random girl inherited all this money, but also the mystery that is hinted about two brothers falling in love with the same girl and the girl dying because of a mysterious reason. You would think these concepts are pretty interesting, because they are, but the execution is so flabbergastingly dull. Reading this book is like the equivalent of dating a guy that promises you they will get something super nice. They will get you the best gift for your birthday. A Swarovski necklace, plane tickets to Japan, some fancy resort, I don't know. He makes all these promises and at the end he ends up buying you an egg apron.
A present from Daniel. Their tickets to Greece, so plane tickets. A hat I can wear in Greece. Oh, my egg apron!
He did it.
The twists were meh, the villains were meh, the romantic tension between the brothers and the MC were meh. The people who were praying for the downfall of the main character were your first guess in the book of who it could have been. I'm like, really? Really? It was the mom? Come on, man. Just make things a little harder for me, please. We were promised all these puzzles and all these games, and we do see some puzzles and games, but at the end it kind of feels like they're not really adding anything onto the story. Yeah, of course it's the mother. We got the most predictable plot twist before GTA 6. So at the end of the book, we learned that the homeless person that the MC was playing chess with at the very beginning of the book was Toby, the son of this mega rich billionaire Tobias, who was known to be dead for many years. And this would be a huge shocker, other than the fact that I don't care. The book is left on a cliffhanger, but why would I keep reading? I don't give a about any of these characters, or Xander for that matter. The hater in me wants to finish the series and make fun of how badly this whole mystery was planned. If you've read this series and at the end you were like, oh my god, it was so satisfying, it was worth it, keep reading, just let me know so I can hop back onto the series. But other than that, these are my impressions. I don't know if I will continue it anytime soon. The fourth book on the list is A Court of Thorns and Roses. Who could have seen that coming? Personally, I shot myself in the foot with this one. Not only were there so many people on TikTok recommending me this book, I also follow a lot of artists on TikTok and Instagram because I'm pretty into art. Guys, the fan art of this series is god tier. These artists are so talented and immaculate in their work that they really sell you the series. When I read the source material behind this expertly crafted works of art, these grand illustrations with so many details, so many emotions, so many immaculate backgrounds and sceneries, I was quite disappointed. The seemingly interesting world and diverse cast of interesting characters that I was promised was pretty much non-existent. I feel like Sergey Maas needs to pay these fan artists, because if the fan art wasn't so beautiful, a lot of people wouldn't get into the books in the first place. The fan art is so good that you would think that Sergey Maas actually saw the fan art first and decided to write fan fiction about it. So basically, Sergey Maas made fan art about the fan art. That's just how good the art is. Like, look at this. Look at this. Tell me you wouldn't want to read this. Like, they were dangling a carrot in front of me saying that, oh, this series, it has so much good stuff in it, you better go read it. And the actual series was like a sad attempt painted in Microsoft Paint. Look, even though I don't particularly like the Throne of Glass series either, I get the hype. The series, I simply don't understand, especially after reading Throne of Glass. How can you not come to the conclusion of how much of a self-plagiarizing derivative and an original a work ACOTAR is? Again, Throne of Glass is not perfect. If you watch my video commenting on it, you will know exactly how I feel about it. But still, some characters, and especially Manon's arc and part of Aylin's story, is actually pretty interesting. ACOTAR, in comparison, feels, again, so diluted, so bare minimum of a fantasy that, you know, I wouldn't even necessarily call it a fantasy. It's just a romance that takes place in a fantastical setting, because the focus isn't really on world building about these fantasy races, about exploring this world. It's more about who gets dicked down by who. You can't tell me, also if you've read Throne of Glass, that you haven't noticed that there are line by line, scene by scene comparisons that can be made in between the two series, because they're just so similar at some points. Some scenes, I feel like the author just like copied them and pasted them on ACOTAR and just changed the characters' names. When Feyre and and Reese were having the horizontal relations for the first time, the lines they used for each other were so eerily similar when Aelin and Rowan were first doing the horizontal relations. In reality, Sarah J. Maas is just pumping out the same book and slightly changing the characters' names, thinking that we won't notice. I will make another video about this, comparing the ACOTAR series to a Wendy's burger, and you will understand in depth why I feel this way. It just feels so mass-produced. It tastes great, but it just feels kind of soulless at the same time. But I would say overall the series is entertaining, excluding A Court of Silver Flames because that was actually an excruciating read. But the main trilogy up until A Court of Wings and Ruin is like,
I mean, it's alright. Like, overrated as fuck in my opinion. I mean...
Next book up in this series is A Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. This book...
It's the biggest piece of dog shit that I have ever heard.
So now we're slowly getting into the No Saving Grace faction. I was especially excited for this book because I got the very cool Turkish special edition version with a beautiful lilac binding with silver flowers and decorations. Oh, it was so pretty. It looked absolutely gorgeous, which was very deceptive. The book was lying to me. You know how they say don't judge a book by its cover? They are right, because the cover might be very pretty and the book itself might be.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
The book started out pretty well with the library and the explanation of the magic system and the grimoires and their classification system. And there I sat, waiting. For what, you ask? For something to fucking happen. The pacing in this book is so inconsistent that even when things are happening, they're so fast. They're like a whirlwind that you can't really keep track of what's happening. So it's these huge chunks where nothing is happening. And a little millimeter of a second something is happening. It's so fast you can't keep up. Like, by God, how can you make a magic system where they grade grimoires in a 10-level classification system in accordance with how dangerous they are? Boring. There is so much to work with that. The villains in the book are just pure evil for no reason, and the main character, the only personality trait she has is being tall. I kid you not. Don't get me wrong, I love that for her. Being 5'6" myself, I guess I'm not exactly a tower, but I've always been regarded on the taller side. So I always feel a sort of personal connection to people who are, you know, presented to be taller in books and media. Nathaniel, which is the main love interest, his bisexuality is mentioned randomly a couple of times. And I'm not being like an enemy for LGBTQ. That's great for him, but I'm still waiting. Still waiting for the plot. I mean, there was a point in the book where Nathaniel, the supposed love interest, died, and for the life of me, I could not summon a single flying Live, laugh, love, and die our bisexual king. From looking at the reviews on Goodreads, I can see that I'm in the minority here. But if you haven't noticed, I'm very particular about pacing because of the fried dopamine receptors in my brain. I can read entire series with each of them having 800 and 900 pages in it. That wasn't me. That was him. That was him making that weird ass noise, okay? I just cannot wrap my head around how this 464 page book has shaved off years of my life. Our final contestant to my list is the Red Queen series by Victoria Aveyard. Finally, time to be a little mean. If you've read this series above the age of 18 and think that it's the most sensational, thought-provoking class commentary that you've ever read, I don't know what to tell you, bro. If you think that the premise of this series is original in a post-Hunger Games, in a post-Red Rising world, I don't know what to tell you, man. I feel like if you gave a class of middle schoolers an assignment saying that they need to write a dystopian book, at least half of the class of 13-year-olds would come up with this exact same plot and exact same characters. That's how derivative and unoriginal this series is. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love to take Victoria Aveyard's publishing advice. It's not an easy industry to get ahead, you know? I would love to know how she got around to publishing this series, but line-by-line writing advice, yeah, I'm gonna get that from somewhere else. This is a society where people with silver blood have superpowers and they hold all the power, and people with red blood are ugly peasants that live in the slums and are oppressed by this silver-blooded ruling class. A main character out of the poor, disenfranchised group turn out to have powers similar to the silver-blooded oppressing class, leading to an uprising, a revolution of the current order, which she reluctantly ends up leading. Do you see where I'm going with this? Your mom, your brother, your sister, your grade school teacher, and everyone in this world would be able to come up with the exact same plot. Just prove me wrong, man. Prove me wrong and say that you haven't ever heard of some derivation of this plotline. My god, the world building in this series is so boring. It's so uninspired. I feel like it's unfair to call it a fantasy. It's so aggressively mid. And again, this is one of those series that don't merit 5 books. Giving a series 5 books gives it the impression that it's this very deep world that has a whole history, has a bunch of cultures. The main events of this entire series can be fit into a duology. I should have been Victoria Aveyard's editor, man. I would have wrapped out that shit pretty concisely in 2 books. It's so needlessly wordy. I've also noticed some phrases are just like repeated over and over and over for no reason. Like, for example, one of the main love interests, Cal, which is an abbreviation for Tiberius for some reason. I don't know how it's an abbreviation for Tiberius. But the fact that Cal is a soldier is repeated so many times in the main character's head. Damn, Cal is a soldier? Really? It's not like it was repeated to me over 50 times. Just random things Mare, the main character, feels are explicitly stated and repeated over and over again so we get it through our thick, dumb heads. But it's not only repeated in Mare's head, but it's also repeated by the statements of other characters. So if Mare is feeling a certain kind of way, this will also be repeated by a character from another point of view. So we understand exactly how she's feeling because we weren't convinced the first time she said it. Why did we have a POV of Cameron, one of the most annoying, entitled characters I had the displeasure of reading? Cameron's POV feels like a war crime. And I can't believe everyone was shitting their pants over Maven. And I'm like, you did not see that coming. I can't help you there. And you would think that Maven would be an interesting, two-faced, two-sided character that wants or has a side of him that wants to be good, but just the way he was raised and the pressure that's coming from his mom kind of compelled him to grow in the other dark way, and it's just not. It's not there. We were given some reasons to why he's the way he is. I guess, what am I expecting from a YA book written in 2015? I forgive you, Victoria Aveyard. The ending would have been super climactic and awesome if I remembered anything about it. Well, that is all I had to say about the most overhyped YA fantasy books that I've ever read. Now that I'm thinking, Inheritance Games doesn't really count as a fantasy, but I just wanted to include it here because of reasons. I just needed to talk about it, man.
Oh yeah, I still have the physical copies of the first 2 books of An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir, and if you want to get these books for absolutely free, just let me know down in the comments and I will literally ship it to you for free. I really want these books gone, man. And yeah, with that being said, thank you for watching and see you next time.